Emily, and this is my dad, Jerry. I am interviewing him on this week's drug, tobacco. The reason I chose him was because he grew up on a tobacco farm, yet he has never chewed or smoked this killer drug. What made you never try it?
Part of it was that my parents at various times when I was a kid smoked, and I always found that disgusting. I hated the sight of a dirty ashtray, and I hated the smell, and it just seemed like something I wouldn't want to do.
Did you ever have friends from school who tried to get you to smoke?
Well, I had certainly knew kids when I was growing up who smoked, but I don't think anyone really tried to get me to smoke.
Were there a lot of advertisements making smoking look good?
Sure. On television and magazines, on radio, in the newspapers, just everywhere. You couldn't sit down and watch a show at night on primetime TV without seeing cigarette ads.
Looking back, if your parents hadn't have smoked, do you think you would still have tried it?
I don't know. I've always, it's being around other people who smoked as well as my parents kind of turned me off to it as well. So if it hadn't been my parents, it would have been other people. I think it always kind of grossed me out.
What are the risks of tobacco?
Well, the biggest one, I think, is lung cancer. It's I think the biggest single cause of preventable cancers. And it can also contribute to heart disease and things like lip and throat cancer. It's truly a drug that can cause all sorts of ill effects.
What's involved in raising tobacco?
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting. It's very labor intensive, meaning that it takes a lot of work by people. It's planted partly by machine, but people have to operate the machine. And then when it's when it's pretty tall, I think it's taller than me, it blooms. But for the tobacco to develop the way you want it to sell at the cigarette companies, you don't want it to bloom. So people have to go through and do what's called topping it. They pluck that bloom off the top. And that takes a couple of men several hours to do a whole field of tobacco. Then in the late summer and early fall, when it's harvested, at least when I was growing up, and I think this is still largely true, every single stalk of tobacco, this could be an acre or more, was cut by hand. And so you have a guy standing there holding the tobacco stalk with one hand, with a knife, sharp knife, looked a little like a hatchet, and then it would be put on a stick. Eventually those sticks would be hung up in a barn to dry for 3 or 4 months. But that was an extremely labor-intensive thing. It took, several workers. They'd work all day.
And how much would it cost? How much would the people pay you? Do you remember?
For the tobacco? I don't really remember what it would bring a pound anymore, but it did help keep small farms going, and that's one of the reasons it was a popular crop in Kentucky, because the farmer wanted to have a small farm and raise some cattle, certainly vegetables, hay crops, but the tobacco was the one that really brought in the money at the end of the season, and that probably what kept a lot of small family farms going for many years.
So was that my grandfather's main job?
No, it wasn't, but he did have a tobacco crop on our farm on the side. He also worked in a factory.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.